So we're very excited to talk about the topic on how to draft a narrative review article. I've received some good comments because very often we see a lot of papers published using bibliometric or systematic reviews. And we do, for tourism management, receive submissions using primarily bibliometric or systematic review. But very often they get that rejected if that's all they do in that paper. So, and also as part of the guide to authors, we indicated that we have a progress in tourism category. And the articles that we publish in that are normally narrated literature reviews. So that's why we're offering this webinar to get some insights from experienced researchers who have published narrative reviews. I think these are more insightful, less descriptive, and they kind of signpost the subject, outlining where the subject has been developed from with a very strong theoretical conceptual focus. And then the paper will map out where do we go forward in terms of research, more from a theoretical, practical, or methodological orientation. So I won't say too much about the guide in terms of tourism management. I assume this would be suitable for other journals as well. So anyways, we have 3 members agreed to participate in this panel, and we have 2 of them here already, and 1 may be coming, maybe on the way. So first we have Professor Anna Lisk, who is from the Edinburgh Napier University from the UK, and we have Professor Muso Uso from the University of Massachusetts in the US. So I will give each one of you a few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, to talk about your work. I know you have both published narrative reviews. So maybe you want to briefly introduce your work and your experience. How did you scope the study, and basically what did you do? How did you complete the narrative review to the stage where you think it is ready for submission or ready for publication? So can I invite Anna? Do you want to start to do a little bit of sharing first?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me along today. Yes, so I'm Professor Anna Lisk. I'm the lead for the Tourism Research Centre that we run from Edinburgh Napier University in Scotland, UK. That's an interdisciplinary centre where we conduct research and knowledge exchange training in tourism, hospitality and festival events. My role is leading that to sort of try to draw together interdisciplinary researchers and to collaborate with industry to inform policy and practice. The reason that I'm involved in that so much is that my research really focuses, my teaching and research actually combine and focus on visitor attraction management, which has been my area for a long time. I do wander off into other areas every now and then and explore something else, but I always keep coming back to the visitor attractions. So really about how they're managed, how they're conserved, and how we can future-proof them. So my recent research has been still based in visitor attractions, but really to do with different markets. For example, the over 75s, or about developing visitor experiences. And obviously, as part of doing any piece of work, you start off by looking at the existing literature. And what I would say is that my experience with the progress papers, I published one in 2010 and another one in 2016. And I am currently working on a new one, which will hopefully be finished soon. The first one was interesting because it sort of came from my PhD. I did my PhD by publication, and I was trying to draw together the different strands of my research in visitor attractions to try to work out what my contribution to knowledge and understanding would be. And that's quite a challenge, but it's actually the process of doing that is reasonably similar, but on a much smaller scale to writing a narrative review, because you're sourcing the existing literature, you're being critical about it. You're trying to draw together, the similarities or the gaps in the research, and you're trying to sort of set that into some order, some framework, by theme or by debate. So for that first paper, it was quite focused particularly about sort of looking at how my personal research and the people that I work with fitted into that. The 2016 paper was actually much more, I would say, a standard approach to a progress paper, where I, looked at what was existing in the research. I organized it by themes. I did use NVivo to help me with that, though I have to say, I think a lot of it is just immersing yourself into the literature so that you can gauge the quality of it, really, and then arriving at the themes to discuss it. So I'm working out what the contribution of that review is in terms of demonstrating and sort of identifying how things have changed over years, but also where they can go in the future in terms of the methodologies or the gaps in the research that researchers might want to fill. So is that enough, Kathy, for me for now?
Okay, sure. Let's hear from Muso first, and then we can come back and talk about other things.
Sure. Thank you, Katya, for organizing this wonderful panel, and I'm very happy to be part of it. So thinking and talking about narrative review manuscripts, let me just say maybe a couple of things about my own research. For the past 20, maybe 25 some years or so, I've been looking at tourism issues from the perspective of the connection between quality of life, well-being, and let's say the consequences of tourism activities. So this could happen in different research settings, of course, tourism and hospitality, but with my PhDs and colleagues, we look at these issues from three perspectives. Namely, the first perspective is from the perspective of tourists as consumers or participants. So how, let's say, tourism activities are connected to well-being of individuals. The second perspective is naturally looking at these issues from the perspective of residents in a given destination community, so as being one of those important stakeholders. The third one would be looking at these issues from the perspective of providers. So what I mean by that, naturally, you're talking about employees of tourism goods and services. So those are the three perspectives that we use to examine, let's say, the relationship between tourism activities and consequences of tourism activities and quality of life and well-being issues. So in a fully functioning tourism ecosystem. So that's kind of the research framework we have. So in terms of the focus of our panel today, progress or narrative review manuscripts. So I think to date, I've been part of at least, I would say, 6 of those review/progress manuscripts. The first one was published in Tourism Management in 2012. Again, it was about quality of life. And some of you may have seen the latest one that just came out again in Tourism Management that dated, 2024 or 5. So, but also we team up with one of our former PhDs, Adi Berbakova. She's teaching at University of Hawaii. And Professor Albert, myself, 3 of us, and Adi led that paper, and that was about crisis management, a specific topic. This will become important in our discussion later on, having a broad topic versus very focused topic. And then we also published that those 3 appeared in Tourism Management. And I also led 2 others in book chapters, again, about quality of life related issues. And then another book chapter with one of our recent PhD students, now Jiawi Wang, and we focus on quality of life and experience issues. That was a book chapter. So I think 5 or 6 pieces that I was part of in terms of narrative review or progressive or narrative review progress manuscripts or papers. So I think I know we have so many maybe issues to cover, but I can point a couple of things. When I look at a typical review / progress report, I think about a couple of elements. One is time. You've got to have good enough time. The other is a team. You have to have a good team to do this. I don't think this is an effort that can be done solo. That's my experience. And also, with all this, you have to have expertise that could be technical expertise and conceptual expertise. So at times, even if we have young upcoming, let's say, scholars, I don't really encourage, let's say, a young scholar to take on a challenging task of crafting a narrative review at an early stage in their professional life. I seem to enjoy having some sort of expertise. So regardless, one of the team members has to have that historical knowledge where he or she can tap into the existing pool of knowledge to propel the engine. So that's, to me, very important. So time, do not rush. Like, don't think that this will take less time. I think at last one that we published in tourism management, believe it or not, Kathy probably and Stephen will know this. Honestly, it took us almost 2 years to complete the whole thing. The moment we started this thing and how we digested over time, because it involves a lot of reiterative type, back and forth process. Anyway, so my way of looking at this thing, you need to have quality time that you need to devote or spend on this. You have to have a good team that will offer some expertise, technical and conceptual. And also, the kind of topic you choose to do this, because for that topic, we have to have some sort of pool of knowledge that has already accumulated.
Okay.
Does that good enough?
Yes, please stay on, because since you mentioned you must have time, you must have the expertise, and so those are the resources perspective. So what do you see in a review, narrative review manuscript itself? What are the components that the manuscripts must have, comparing to other types of papers? And I don't, I didn't really mention about, because I mentioned about the bibliometric review, systematic review. How do you see the differences between the, what we're talking now? Because Anna kind of mentioned that it's more immersive, less mechanical. Can you just, incorporate that into your following comments? So Muso, please.
Okay, sure. I think this is good. You alluded to it in the beginning. Actually, we seem to have a couple of terms that are floating around, right? So we talk about narrative review, progress paper or report. We talk about thematic review. We talk about maybe thematic analysis, right? And bibliometric. So at the outset, you can make the statement that these are things, maybe techniques, approaches that complement each other. They can all be brought into the same research setting. But yet, there is a difference between a typical, I would say, narrative review paper and a thematic review paper. Let's say the paper we did was a thematic review paper, which focused on Adi Letti's, our PhDs, crisis management. So there is a narrowly defined specific topic, then we kind of delve into that topic, right? Crisis management. That was more of a thematic review. It can also get pretty quantitative in the way you identify, let's say, certain coding, for example, and more of a like focused method framework that has a well-structured maybe steps that you follow. Okay, you kind of, maybe we're going to talk about that, like Prisma, etc. But when you have let's say, a review article that usually provides a broad overview of a topic. So you still synthesize, summarize existing literature, right? You make some sense, making sense out of all that back and forth. And then maybe in the end, you just bring, points of discussion, trends, and knowledge synthesis that will lead to gap identification and hopefully, as Anna said in the beginning, like a roadmap ahead, like where we go from here. So I think it sounds like when you have a narrative review paper, you have a lot of leeways, flexibility in terms of the structure. That does not mean that your paper should lack of a good structure, organization. It's got to be well organized. So maybe in the beginning, you work on that structure, organization that can create that roadmap where you have flexibility at the same time structure, but not necessarily when you do a typical systematic review, because that requires certain technical steps you have to take to arrive at. If you do a paper just exclusively using systematic review process, that may not give you the kind of things that you're looking for if you were to do a narrative review paper. You see, that's why for a narrative review paper, you need to have expertise, in my mind, understanding of that topic and focus. That's why I say expertise will be extremely important. You can get technical help, but for a typical bibliometric analysis, that can be cut and dry. I remember there was this ad, maybe Kate remembers, in the USA, Wendy's introduced, where is the beef? So you can have the skeleton, but it has to have that beef around a typical narrative review manuscript for it to taste good, if I may say so.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna, do you want to follow up with your take on what is narrative review and what do you see as the must-have in the manuscript?
Yes, I mean, I agree with quite a lot of the comments there in terms of, what's required for it. I think for me that sort of at the core of it is the quality. It's about identifying the quality outputs that you're going to include or not include. And that's a really, central part to it. You have to make sure you're using quality outputs in order to be able to actually then, develop something worthwhile. I think having that context, as Michelle said, having that context and background knowledge of the sector or the topic or the theme is hugely important. And then working out in terms of the methods, your approach in terms of how have you decided which of the outputs to select to include? What's the criteria that you've been using in order to decide whether something goes in or not? And what's the strategy been for that? So you need to know that up front. And I think you also have to be able to justify why it's a narrative review rather than a systematic one or another form, which is usually relating to it being a particular focus on a particular sector or theme or debate, that you feel that there's a need for that. I think organizing it, sort of getting that synthesis of all the relevant literature, adding the critical analysis to it, that's what makes it different. It's not just description, it's getting that critical analysis and comparison of different perspectives, perhaps in terms of the approaches to research. I remember with some of mine, it was very interesting sort of looking at it in terms of sort of the different disciplinary approaches to research on the topic and how those contributed to the research area moving forward. And I think also being able to identify those implications for policy and for practice, if that's relevant for the area that you're in. Certainly the ones that I've worked on in terms of visitor attractions, it's been very much about making a contribution to the academic literature, but also how can this be used in a practical sense for those that are determining policy and practice.
Okay. So do you find it more challenging to write comparing to an empirical piece?
I think, yes, in terms of the how long it takes, you're quite right. The one I'm working on just now is proving a challenge in terms of there are just so many publications out there now, and there are so many different avenues to go down. I think I personally do find them more challenging because I think you have to really know the area and you have to really spend a lot of time getting into what all those outputs are. You can't just pop it into in vivo and expect it to pop out some themes. You have to know, so you have to really immerse yourself in it all, which is time consuming. As Muzo said, it's you need to take the time to do that. I mean, it's great fun. And if it's an area of research that you really enjoy, then you know it's a very happy way to spend your time. I think sometimes there's a concern, for me, I find there's a concern that I've missed something. You know, that so I maybe keep on going into the literature when maybe I need to stop. But I'm just worried I'm going to have missed something that was really important. And I think sometimes there's a little element of disappointment sometimes when, particularly if you've written one of these before and you had all these, you know, ideas on how the future research should be, and you look at it and think, nope, we're still basing all of these visitor attraction pieces on case studies. We're not doing anything longitudinally, we're not doing anything broader. So that's, you know, a little bit disappointing when you kind of think, oh, I wanted it to develop in a different way, and it hasn't quite. I think also trying to work out the contribution of the paper can sometimes be difficult. You have to be really organized, and you have to be quite determined to source all the different, you know, make sure that what you've got is worthwhile. And then you've got to really, really sort of draw that together. I think with a more traditional research paper, you've got a project, you research that, there's a lot in it, but you've got quite a lot of signposts to what the contribution of that is going to be. I think it's harder with a narrative review.
Yeah.
If may I add something here? This is
Sure.
so good, just to follow up on Anna's points. You know, I have also reviewed at least 8 papers like this, right? Papers that have utilized bibliometric or schematic analysis for different journals outside, let's say, even hospitality and tourism. My experience with those papers have been very mixed, because they have a lot of information, but not necessarily good critical analysis as to where we go from here. You have a lot of summaries of facts and visualizations. They are all in there. But at the same time, you read it, it's fun, but I ask myself, did I learn something here? Like this wow effect. If you know the literature good enough, you say, this doesn't really add much, but everything looks so visually appealing, you know, like really attractive, right? I think I usually had a hard time. In a couple of cases, I said, I don't really think, you know, this should be published as is, because it uses up a lot of space, but doesn't really give you a lot of critical analysis. You have a lot of summaries, you have a lot of inventories, like this, that, list names, and it's all, how would I say, overwhelming in the end. So it's hard to extract the key things. You know, what does this add to knowledge? You know, how does this advance us move forward, right? Things like this, I seem to have hard times. Maybe we should not, as you don't, I know this, Kathy, shouldn't encourage some of these people to do this, and because we know, let's say, this quantitative or qualitative softwares, we can use bibliometric techniques right and left. It's fine, but to me, really, especially people who don't have the expertise, knowledge, should not be encouraged to engage in this kind of practice. That's my way of looking at this after having reviewed so many papers and having done a couple of these. It's a challenge, because it's the kind of, unlike typical empirical paper we're talking about that has a structure, that's a learned behavior. Over time, we improve all that. The techniques, the statistics, you don't have 20 ways of explaining regression results or chi-square tests, or even if you use PLS, etc. It's just structure. When we look at this so-called narrative essay type writing, that has to be creative too. It's not a typical conventional way of crafting a paper. Therefore, a lot of investment. So, you know, we shouldn't be attracted to this, you know, technique that I know how to do, let me do this. Once we had a seminar here, someone talked about festival event motivation. With 35, 40 articles, they wanted to create the whole world, right? Well, you can take a look at all this, get a good sense of it. I don't think you should go through the process just to go through the process to create something with 40 articles and make an impactful statement. It just doesn't work. at times. We have to be a little bit careful and mindful of the knowledge that exists around the topic.
Yeah. Well, you brought up a good point about bibliometric or systematic, because they have to follow this process. And with bibliometric, there are a lot of different softwares available now to generate lots of graphs and charts and all that. So for someone who have never done a narrative review, can I simplify that by saying narrative review, you're taking more of a qualitative approach, whereas the other two are more quantitative approach? Would that too much of a simplification of the
I think
difference?
I agree with that. It's a good overall framework, but at the same time, if you want to make a good review narrative paper come alive, I think somehow throughout the duration of that process, which is a pretty lengthy process, you may become quantitative at times. It's a matter of, let's say, let's say you're bringing NVivo into it. You can also create queries, codes, and you can just bring all this into Excel and then still, do further quantification. That happens. Even part of, let's say, using vis-a-vis your, bibliometric software, part of it could be quantitative, but you have a lot of qualitative information that need to be digested, dissected, so that you understand what it is that we're looking at, the 6 clusters of, words. It doesn't say much unless you know the field a little bit, movers and shakers and what's going on in that. So I agree 100% with the general overarching framework, the approach, but at the same time, the process can be enhanced by bringing some of those possible qualitative, quantitative tools and techniques into it. So part of it can become thematic analysis, or let's say even critical analysis. Some even say scoping analysis, like looking at maps. So those things can help enhance this so-called narrative essay craft or manuscript in a way. But initially it's more of a qualitative approach. It can also utilize some other, technical software or anything else that you want to use. Even, let's say, good content analysis using Excel file, zeroing in on critical articles about the topic, because you don't want to miss, when you do this kind of analysis, 4 or 5 critical articles should be there. So people sometimes forget about, let's say, what are the things you should have in there. You want to make sure that you don't leave out any important study, because some people tend to do that because they don't just have a good handle over, let's say, the pool of knowledge. But anyway, I agree. Simply, yes, that is true. But we can also utilize other techniques and available tools. Even you can bring, let's say, artificial data as needed to make a point. So I think in terms of enhancing what we have a lot of things that are disposable to utilize, but we have to still maintain the focus of what we're trying to do or say here. Otherwise, it becomes too technical. Just as I said, a lot of listing, inventory, visualization, and it just doesn't give you what you're looking for as a journal editor or even just as a reader.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna, what is the process that you go through? Do you use, because you mentioned earlier about immersive going back and forth, and you do use NVivo. What is the approach that you use or go through when you craft a narrative review piece?
In terms of sourcing the literature that's going to go into that, or the actual writing of?
Yeah.
So the one that I'm working on just now is, as I say, more like the one that I did in 2016. So I've sort of, and it's a follow-up to that. That dealt with papers between 2010 and 2016. This one will deal with 2016 on to current. So I used much the same process that I did with that, in that it's essentially a lot of time searching for literature that is of relevance. And probably what I would say I do, on this occasion, that we do have a team. I did the 2 previous ones myself, but we have a team now for exactly the reasons that you outlined, Mizo. And so we've done extensive literature searches, probably casting the net very far and wide. And then what we've done is we've used the same sort of criteria that we used before in terms of the period of time that the paper had to relate to visitor attraction management, not just generally visitor attractions per se, that it had to sort of be something that was to do with the focus of the paper. And we then go through and we code those in terms of the types of methods, the geography, whether it's rural or urban, different things like that. So as you say, it is a qualitative piece of work, but you can add in little features on that so that you've got a bit of an indication of where the papers are coming from and so forth, and the types of papers, the categories. So for visitor attractions, you have historic ones, you have theme parks, you have visitor centres, you have archaeological monuments. So we take each of the outputs, we have the abstract, we code them, and then we put them into NVivo, and we go in looking for particular themes, and then we also see what other themes come out. So, and then sit down and discuss which ones we want. And I think it comes back to that quality of the output. We then go back and check that the quality of those outputs are relevant to the research questions and that we set out right at the start, really, in terms of it being focused on visitor attraction management. And then comes the fun part of writing all of that up. We do tend to use, I have used some tables in the past just to help sort of identify things by themes, but not listing all of the sources. And usually we would look for some sort of framework at the end, maybe, to give an indication of how things might move forward. But that, I confess, don't tell Stephen, but we haven't got to that stage yet. We're still on the looking at everything we have and writing that up.
Okay, well, I think both of you mentioned there could be a combination of, right? Even with a narrative review, you could use some of the systematic or bibliometric review technique, but then that's not the focus. You need to go beyond just listing or categorizing or presenting pretty pictures. So yeah, absolutely. And we have a comment in the chat box, and also I would like to ask a similar question. The comment is, if because Musso indicated we spend so much time on this, on the narrative review, then what is the significance? I guess the question is, how do we articulate the contribution to knowledge based on a review exercise? Because I know in the UK and in Hong Kong as well, when we do the research assessment exercise, review papers don't count. So what is the significance? Why are we doing it? What is the contribution, and how do we articulate the contribution of narrative reviews?
Can I come in on that? Because
yes,
actually, please. For we do sometimes use the narrative papers. I think so. Last time round, we certainly submitted my one as part of that. It's a question of whether it's critical enough, whether it shows and demonstrates the contribution of that paper, rather than the fact that it's a review. So we've debated that at length, but we have included them in part. Why you would do it, I think from my point of view, it's shining a light on a sector that's maybe previously been under-researched, which in my case for visitor attraction management was certainly the case of why we started doing that. It's a sector that often doesn't really get much coverage in the literature. So a narrative review provides that state of the art. This is where the research is. This is what it covers. It demonstrates the novelty maybe of that sector, what it is that's different about it in terms of the research and the impact of that. So you might have a systematic review, but that's not really going to tell you very much in terms of how that sector has developed over time in terms of the research and where it could be going in the future, on the basis of the specific critical view of the content of that. So I think the narrative review, it allows researchers to gather the research in an area, a topic, a sector, organize it, identify the connections between the different aspects, and critique it, which you don't particularly get in the other types of review.
Okay. Also, why
Yeah.
you have been involved in 5 or 6 narrative reviews?
Well, this is a good question, actually. Why bother, right? It takes so much time, and it takes a lot of time and requires good expertise. Now, let me say something at the outset. I remember in the beginning when we had this new, software program coming on board, like to do bibliometric analysis. Even they created a journal here and there. I think it had a functional reason, let's say, just to demonstrate that you can have that kind of review article, whether it's valued by your institution or not. In our case, if it's reviewed, as was the case with us, right? We went through the whole review process, revised, and that is just as good as any other typical article for us in our institution. I think no one has raised an issue about that. But in the beginning, some of these journals got into this impact factor war. So this was a way of, let's say, boosting, the impact factor of a given journal. If they have a couple of review papers, people will cite some of these papers more often than, let's say, more narrowly defined, empirical articles. So I put that aside, but I had to mention this because I was part of a couple of discussion groups about this, the role of, this so-called essay review papers, not necessarily progress. So I still draw a little line there so they can be slightly different from each other. Now, going back, why do we bother? I think if contribution, that's what we're talking about. How do we contribute to society, or how do we contribute to knowledge? I think in a typical review essay paper, we should really have 4 different things we should think about. One is, does this review or essay identify clearly, let's say, gaps, in the literature, in the pool of knowledge, or would we be able to reveal unexplored areas within this, let's say, literature or review of this, whatever we're reviewing, let's say quality of life? So demonstrate those gaps, and then how can we tap into these gaps to advance the field? So that's like one of the sources of making your contribution, because you look at this thing from top down, but this is where the importance of expertise becomes so important, because you don't want to go through the motion to create a review essay paper. You have to feel the emotion associated with it. It's like, where is the beef? So in order to make those statements, you really have to have the knowledge. That's why I said it has to be a team effort. I cannot imagine one person doing this kind of work based on my experience. That's one area. The other thing is, even if you do comprehensive literature review as part of it, looking at studies, so you have this holistic approach to all that. So that means you have to digest, it's a reiterative process, sit down with the team members and draw connection between all different points and dots, right? So in a way, you're trying to synthesize this existing knowledge, bringing that out, delineating that, synthesize, let's say, overarching theme would also give you something as a novel idea or something that will help you move forward. Meaning, you see, synthesis and critical analysis of findings, get away from the inventory of those things you present visually. So then I think with that, you would be able to maybe identify theoretical contribution and where we can go from here, right? So because you're doing critical analysis, you're refining conceptual frameworks that have driven this line of research, because you got total ownership of the review process. Therefore, you have richer information. You can do this even at times, I call it like, it's a little bit funny, but critical analysis at the same time, I would say the term that I'm looking for is more of, let's say, rhetoric analysis in quotation, because that comes from your knowledge and expertise. If you see something that it says, as an example, relation to, let's say, destination management, it says, let's say, community resilience. You've got to know how that can be interpreted in that context so that you have good empirical, practical implication in the end. Does this make sense? So you may come across a lot of concept terms when you do the dots and connections. In order to show your contribution, you need to understand those concepts. They are used in that particular space by practitioners, by researchers. So in a way, I think another area, how do we contribute to society knowledge by using these essay reviews? Well, you have to provide good practical implications in the end. So what would this do to destination management? Just an example, right? So in order to make sense out of all this, again, your expertise, your iterative skills will be so important so that you digest that knowledge. If you have all this kind of synthesized, critically analyzed, digested, then you would be able to provide new direction for researchers. Where do we go from here? Then, as we did, we had 3 stakeholders in our last review paper. From the perspective of, I said, tourists, from the perspective of, let's say, communities or residents, and from the perspective of providers. So we maintained that cohesiveness so that in terms of knowledge contributions, practical implications, new directions, so we framed our suggestions within that overarching framework, if that made sense. So therefore, you have to really articulate the contribution, its usefulness. That's what I said. I reviewed a number of papers where I said, I don't know what to say. I don't think this should use up 15 pages in this journal. Maybe, like 5-page something is good enough, because contribution is important. Yes, do we need this kind of research? Going back to the question in the chat, why do we do this? I think maybe you earn to do a paper like this. I don't think this should be given to you. I really believe that these review papers have to be earned. Like an expert should weigh in on this with younger scholars, mid-level scholars. It's a team effort. So I keep saying that because my experience told me that we cannot know everything. Younger people know a lot of good techniques and tools. They are so good at it. Maybe more established scholars in the field could really give the big picture. Therefore, we can contribute significantly to the success of a good narrative essay or manuscript together.
Yeah, very good. Quite a few good points that you have commented there. I want to go back to the chat box. There is a good question about narrative review points out the gaps and perhaps the wrong assumption or taken for granted assumptions. Then what's the difference between narrative review and critical review? Either of you has an answer or comment? Difference between critical review and narrative review. Anna?
I'll leave it to
okay.
Anna, because I talk
Okay.
too much, then I can
All
think
right,
a little
Anna.
bit about it.
To be perfectly honest, I don't have a huge amount of experience of critical ones myself, in terms of that's not really an area I've done. What I think of as a narrative review is that you have probably quite a broad subject area, and you are drawing together the research that relates to that and identifying the themes within that. So there's quite a lot of flexibility in that, in terms of how you're approaching it, providing the background context, providing your point of view as the researcher. My understanding more of a critical one would be that they're a bit more analytical and a bit more about sort of trying to discuss factual claims or specific aspects that have come from individual papers, and sort of trying to highlight the flaws and strengths of what's been said. That's not so much what the narrative review is about. It's about looking at the contribution and the development of research, rather than the critiquing an individual piece of work from that point of view. That's just my thought on it.
I
Okay.
agree. I think, critical review. I used to give this assignment to my graduate class. We will say article critic. So we had a nice template, people would just follow. And so, as Anna said, this could happen on a specific topic. It could be even just on, you see this in academic journals, and then someone writes a nice article, and then someone can do the critic. You see like 3 or 4 page long on that kind of a rejoinder type of reaction. So critical review could still be, as Anna said, part of your so-called narrative essay review, but it's just when you analyze certain concept, places, specific topics within your big framework of this narrative paper research effort, right? So just a small portion of it could touch on critical review, but you can do a critical review of an essay, critical review of a published place, or critical review on, let's say, use of, I'm saying, bibliometric methods. That will be important, like do's and don'ts and what does it do type, more specific product-oriented outcome. So it has a place, but it's not, they are not substitute for each other. But critical review could be part of a bigger, let's say, narrative review type effort.
Yeah. Okay, great. There are a few comments in the box that I think are related. But I think to summarize the few questions, basically, how do you pick the articles that you review? Because again, it's different from systematic review that they will tell you they go through the scopus using this and that keywords and that. But for narrative review, you don't have to explain how did you pick or select the articles that included in your review. Again, that expertise came into place. And then a related question here is, can you include state of the play or commentary papers? And the other question relates to, do you just read the abstract? Can you read the title only? And so all of these, I think, are related, still a bit unclear about how do you do narrative review. What should you include? How do you select the articles that you want to include? And so again, it's that method. A little bit of clarification would be very helpful.
Depends really how much time you want to invest into this process. Let's say you use one of these databases, whether it's the Scopus, let's say the Web of Science or MedPub, whatever the database. It's a matter of how comprehensive you want to make it to be. The challenge is up to you. You control this thing as much as you can. For me, you can just be fine with one database, the Web of Science or Scopus. But some places, based on papers, they complement each other. And in our case, we did at least 2 and then eliminate duplicates, just a step, because there's so much that can go into this, right? So maybe that's one way of just cleaning this data issue. If you download, let's say, from the Web of Science Scopus into WYSIWYG, one of those bibliometric software, right? Then you can do it, the abstract, and then this and that, right? That's not good enough, right? Unless you know this some of these key articles in detail to make some sense out of it, like don't miss those key articles. Then the best thing would be, maybe as we did, we selected out of 500, some 15 key articles, we brought them into NVIDIA, and I was talking about. Then you do the complete text analysis of the entire manuscript, coming up with queries and recoding and coding. You see what I'm getting at here? You can keep just expanding. Then in the end, you have to bring it back. From there, then you move into thematic analysis. What are the themes that emerge? So you kind of reconcile this, because you got some WYSIWYG visualization, like authorship, word co-occurrence, whatever you're doing, they have to be synthesized in order to create that good storyline, because otherwise integration is up to you. So no one is going to prevent me from doing all this. You see, this is the backdrop, the back scene of what you're doing. That has to be digested. That's why I said you need expertise, knowledge expertise, technical expertise. You need time. You cannot rush a good narrative piece or research progress overnight, 6 months. It's just based on my experience. So the quality of it is extremely important. I remember when we had this exchange with Kathy as the manager of tourism management, even Stefan, they kind of gave us guidelines. Let's get away from some of this typical bibliometric. I completely agree. So in the end, the quality would matter so that people can find that article useful in terms of implications, theoretical framework, directions, etc., etc. It has to have added value in the end, not just, a paper, if I am making sense.
Absolutely. So how do you respond to the challenge of it is quite subjective?
Exactly. This is good, subjective. So that's what I said in quotation, rhetoric analysis. Rhetoric analysis means someone, let's say, who has done so much work, Hyang Sun in econometry, Geng Li. Those are the people, you see, they can do that rhetoric. Let's say consumer behavior, Professor Katya, can do that. Or let's say quality of life, I have done a lot. This is where that expertise plays a significant role to create like sense making out of what you have. If that is missing, the paper becomes dry and it doesn't add much. And when I review it, I say it's fine technically, but it doesn't give us much. I don't know what I am looking for, but I know if it's there, this is what it should be quality-wise, right? So I still emphasize that expertise and knowledge in that area. So you have to have a good team to do a meaningful, engaging, directive, guiding, narrative, essay, manuscript. That's what I believe in.
Okay, all right. Anna, how do you write? Do you write that in first person, third person? What is your take on the question about author being visible in the manuscript?
I think I need to look back and see.
Yeah.
I think generally it's about communicating my voice or our voice as the researchers. So that's the most appropriate way to do it. So to write as you are speaking, and your thoughts are being expressed within the writing.
Yeah. So for example, for the future research direction, you will say, we recommend this, or we summarize, and yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. And again, going back to the earlier comment, there is a comment about reading the abstract or the title or that. I assume you will read the whole papers, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think what I was referring to there was sort of for in vivo, we use the abstracts to help identify the themes. You couldn't really use just the titles because that's not going to, I mean, it wouldn't be sufficient. If you were going to try and do anything using a shorthand, maybe the keywords might do something, but that's not really the purpose of the type of review. You really need to we have all of that there, and it comes back to the devoting time and attention to it and thought process to make the connections. You might look at the abstract to start with, but you have to read all of the papers. You have to go through that because it might not, as we keep coming back to, it might not be the quality of the paper that is worth having in there. And also the abstract, I don't know, not everybody's very good at writing abstracts. They don't always actually communicate what's within the paper. They're often something that people leave to the end. And so I would not be relying just on those, no.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think we have only a couple minutes left. There is a final question specifically for tourism management. Do we consider narrative review on emerging topics? Yes, depending on how you define emerging topics. Because usually when you write narrative review, you will review at least 10 years of work, right? What is the time frame you two usually go back in terms of literature? Do you go by 10 years, 15 years? What is the period you usually look at, or from the very beginning?
Well, this is a personal judgment, but I think it has to have some historical, right, background. If you do the Web of Science, if you do basic data downloading analytics, that would give you from whatever, so many, you can have time and when the whole area picked up, early 2000. And so you kind of know the historical development on that topic, right? So you have that kind of background or information. This is where you can be exhaustive enough, but not to the extent that you review every article that is about that topic. That does not gonna serve you well. What will serve you well out of that pool of, let's say, 400, 700 final list of selection articles, you have probably 10, 15, maybe 5 would be review articles. Make sure you zero in on those. As we did, for example, in our case, I think we had 15 of those papers in chapters in our journals. We extracted those and brought them into NVivo. So we did further analysis of those. That's what I'm getting at. So the complete article, not just the abstract, not the keywords, etc. That was useful for us. But I would say 10, 15, you can just make that case. I think that is acceptable. You don't want to go too far back, but you can say, let's say we did the first review article in 2012, which we published in Tourism Management. Then we did it in 2025 or 24. So I think so we kind of use some of the earlier thing we used to reference, but we did not draw on the same outline concept either. So if that makes sense. So 10, 15, depending upon the topic. Going back to emerging, that's a different, I don't know what kind of narrative essay you can do on an emergent topic. You see, that just could be, as Kata said, anything, maybe critical commentator or something. I think you have to have some body of knowledge accumulated to really make sense out of the existing literature and give us direction.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to have an existing body of knowledge to know where we have been, what's the progress, and therefore what's missing, and then how do we go forward.